There are tons of rivalries in League of Legends. Vi vs Jinx, Volibear vs Zillion, Kha'Zix vs Rengar, Kayle vs Morgana, Swain vs Jarvan, Nasus vs Renekton, Zed vs Shen, Gangplank vs Misfortune, Leona x Diana, Leona vs Diana, Lucian vs Thresh. At one point or another, you've seen one of these feuds within the game's lore, which, by the way, if you're curious about the actual storytelling of League of Legends, I highly suggest you watch Necrit since he's the lore guy for the game. But one of the more popular quote-unquote rivalries as of late would most likely go to the two brothers, Yasuo vs Yone. Ever since the latter's release and the beautiful cinematics we've seen during the Spirit Blossom event, there's been a lot of discussion around their designs, usually reaching a somewhat premature conclusion that Yone is Yasuo power crept 7 years later. And if you spend any amount of time watching my videos, you'll know I love on Yone for being the most 600 years champion in existence. Whether that statement is true or not doesn't matter, as I'm always right. So, after nursing a bottle of soju one night, I came up with the brilliant idea of making a VS Champion mini-series where I pit two similar champions, at least in gameplay, against each other and compare their abilities, playstyles, synergies, matchups, community perceptions, theme, and whatnot to decide which one was designed better. One other thing, because this is the first episode, I would love if you guys gave me some feedback in the comments after watching, since I'm not entirely sure how to properly structure these videos, but I'll do my best. If nothing else, I hope this will be entertaining for you to listen to. Yasuo was released on December 13th, 2013, a little under 8 years ago, and at least in my eyes, his launch set a precedent for champion design going forward. Prior to him, champions did have their own style and feel, but a large majority of them fit this cookie-cutter process of, one ability does damage, another is a buff or utility of some sort, and another is either crowd control, a dash, or secondary damage. Funnily enough, Yasuo himself follows this almost to the T, but what sets him apart from everyone before him was that he had a gimmick, several ones at that. A skirmisher with vastly amplified crit scaling and an emphasis on knockups. He was also known for having very low cooldown abilities that you would weave in between auto attacks, something you didn't see all too often among skirmishers, as Jax and Tryndamere were exclusively auto attackers that just happened to have resonant abilities. Riven didn't carry the same kind of chainsawing as the former two, but her skirmishing power came from her abilities. Yasuo was the first true instance of a skirmisher that had equal parts abilities and auto attacks, and I'd wager he was at least partly responsible for the way modern skirmishers like Viego and Gwen were made. As for his brother, Yone was released about a year ago and echoed a lot of Yasuo's attributes in his own kit, greatly magnifying his crit chance and having fast abilities with low cooldowns that you can weave in between your auto attacks. But his primary emphasis isn't on knockups and displacements, instead boasting a rushdown playstyle with an emphasis on burst. He's also known for being one of the most overloaded champions in the game when it comes to features, which we'll definitely be revisiting during the video. So, here's how I plan to go about it. On screen there's a grading rubric I'll be ranking both champions with, starting with DPS. DPS strictly entails a champion's persistent damage, that is, their ability to dish out damage continuously. Burst damage is a champion's ability to inflict large amounts of damage in a short period of time, though I'm guessing you already knew that. Mobility is dependent on both combat mobility and tempo, so I'm putting those two in together. In other words, both Udyr and Irelia would get stellar marks for them being fast, despite being fast for different reasons. Defense counts for survivability, endurance, and durability, so let me quickly explain each one. Survivability is how well a champion can escape death. For example, Tryndamere is generally pretty squishy, but he's got his ultimate. Endurance focuses on a champion's ability to stay on the field for long periods of time without having to recall, which means any champion with health or resource sustain. Finally, durability is just your standard tankiness, how much health, armor, and magic resist you can expect them to have. Self-utility comprises the various tools a champion has in their kit that benefit only them. Jax's Counter-Strike is an example of self-utility because it's one of the best abilities in the game, frankly speaking, but it affects only him. Team utility is an extension of self-utility in that whatever utility they have benefits both them and their allies, so while we're on the subject of stopping auto attacks, Shen's Spirit Refuge is a team utility version of Jax's Counter-Strike. Synergies would be how well the champion in question works with other champions. For instance, Sejuani loves having melee auto attackers on her team because she can get permafrost stacks almost instantly, giving her good synergy with melee champions in general, whereas someone like Fiora has zero synergy with her teammates because none of her abilities can work with her allies and vice versa. Lastly, consistency, which speaks for itself. Obviously, a good number of these attributes are prone to being changed over time depending on buffs and nerfs and reworks, but since I'm looking at things conceptually, it shouldn't really make much of a difference. Then, after we go through the rankings, I want to talk about some intangible stuff, so buckle down, we're gonna go through things rather quickly. Prevailing Wisdom is well aware that both Yasuo and Yone score very high in DPS. Once they get the attack speed required to lower their Qs to a 1.3 second cooldown, you're staring at two of the most threatening melee carries in the game. But Yone does beat out his little brother. Both of them have comparable base stats and their crit damage scaling is exactly the same. But while Yone has effectively 4 damaging abilities, Yasuo has only 2, one of which is locked behind a condition that won't be available to you instantaneously. Sweeping Blade's damage is more of an afterthought since it's known for the mobility it provides him. And to go even further, Yone has both hybrid damage and percent health damage, making him shred through resistances and health more easily, not to mention the damage echo he has through Soul Unbound. However, there is a saving grace for Yasuo in that he gains 50% bonus armor penetration after using his ult, which is very significant in the late game, though it's not enough to allow him to catch up. So I'd rate Yone's DPS at pretty much a 10 out of 10, while Yasuo is at a 9. Both are top tier, Yone just wins out by a margin. Burst damage is about the same result as well. For both of them, once they get Immortal Shield Bow and Infinity Edge, you can expect them to two-shot any squishy AD carry or mage that's within striking distance. That said, Yasuo's burst heavily depends on Last Breath, not something readily available. Also, Yone does double as an assassin. His ultimate is enough to one-shot entire groups of enemies with very little preparation. He doesn't need his third Q unlike his brother, and as I mentioned before, he can break through tanks and fighters in the mid-game more easily by virtue of his percent health and hybrid damage. The only case where Yasuo exceeds Yone is when a game goes really late, since Last Breath can dish out way more damage than Fate Sealed. However, it's not an ability that you can cast whenever you want to, and that condition greatly hinders its consistency. Yasuo can get amazing 5-man knockouts on his own, but you usually only see that happening if he's paired with a Malphite or Gragas. As a result, Yone wins again, 10 out of 10 in burst, while Yasuo sits around the 7.5 to 8 range. Onto mobility. This one's actually a tie, and here's my reasoning behind it. In ideal situations, Yasuo can move around a lot more freely with Sweeping Blade than Yone does with his Q, E, and ultimate. Despite this, Yone's abilities are free target, as in he can use Prime Q and his ultimate without having to click on a target, making him way more versatile. All the same, the only scenario where Yasuo's mobility loses is if he's 1v1ing someone in the jungle with no camps alive. Most of the time, he has a lot of targets he can dash through in team fights and skirmishes. Even if there isn't a minion wave, he can still dash through enemy champions. Also, one disadvantage Yone carries is that his mobility is very predictable. Obviously, if he casts Soul Unbound, he's forced to snap back to his original position, meaning he can't use it defensively to run away because he has to go right back. Oh, and let's not forget Yasuo's massive 1400 blink range on his ultimate, allowing him to enter fights from quite literally a full screen away, whereas Yone usually has to run straight towards you, making it easy to see him coming. So it's kind of a mixed bag. Both get an 8 out of 10. They're fast, but not Katarina or Akali levels of dumb. For defense, I think you know who wins this one. Yone's only defensive ability is Spirit Cleave, which does grant him a very large shield, especially if he hits a champion, but the shield is predicated on striking an enemy target, and this does lessen its overall practicality as it only affects its survivability, not so much endurance or durability. Furthermore, while he does have very good mobility, it's almost exclusively used for offense. Yone's movements aren't that fluid, so it's a lot harder to dodge very fast attacks since his Q and ultimate both have cast times, and Soul Unbound is only a minor sidestep. Based on this, Yasuo completely outclasses Yone in defense. His passive shield can regenerate in the neutral game. He can literally mitigate damage just by walking, and it refreshes when he uses Last Breath. Sweeping Blade makes him deceptively evasive too, since it's fast and spammable. In fact, the only way you can really counter it is if you predict when he's going to use it on and who before throwing your attacks in wherever he'll end up. That's almost impossible to do, of course. And his glorious wind wall. Long cooldown? Yes, but it invariably screws over any projectile-based champion. Ash Arrow? Gone. Syndra ult? Blocked. Lee Sin Q? Nope. Vel'Koz? Useless. Wind wall ranks among the most powerful single defensive abilities known to man. Sadly, neither champion is known for their resilience, so I'm not going to give them very high ratings anyway. Yone gets a 5 and Yasuo gets a 7. I know what you guys are going to say, once they get Bloodthirster and Immortal Shield Bow, they're impossible to kill, but those are items, not their innate talents. Self-utility will be hard to determine because it's dependent on a lot of factors, so I might just call it a draw. I know I just talked about how Yone's W shield is in most cases worse than Yasuo's passive shield, but you also can't reliably expect to have your passive shield available when you enter combat, except for the one you get on your ultimate. In that sense, Spirit Cleave is better self-utility because you can trust that you'll get it at least once or twice per fight. Additionally, the ability to dash in, deal a whole bunch of damage, then dash out while cleansing any incoming crowd control or debuffs is just insane. The moment you see a Malphite ulting towards you, or if you got hit by a Zoe Sleepy Bubble, you can completely escape harm. On the flip side, Yasuo's Wind Wall is just too freaking good of an ability, so I'll put both of them at a 7 out of 10. They each have strong self-utility in their own right. The same can't be said for team utility though. Once again, Yasuo's wind wall can solo win team fights if he gets a good spot, and remember, with the press of a single button he can dash from up to 1400 units away and instantly arrive at a fight if any one of his teammates has a displacement, which makes him fantastic for skirmishes and team fights alike. 7 out of 10. This guy's team utility is insane for a skirmisher, it's almost horse manure. Yone on the other hand has no team utility to speak of, so quite unironically a 0 out of 10 for him. That goes for Synergies too. Yasuo's ability to ult off of any knockup counts as a synergy, one of the best there is. Yone is fully self-sufficient for better or worse. 8 out of 10 for Yasuo, 0 out of 10 for his brother. So that brings us to consistency. Make no mistake, Yasuo is a very consistent champion in that he doesn't have any mechanic that makes it difficult for him to execute that isn't skill dependent. But like I said, the main benefit Yone has is that he requires no setup. He doesn't need a knockup, he doesn't need minions, he doesn't really need anything. In other words, Yone and Yasuo are both pretty consistent if we compare them to someone like Illaoi, but between the two, Yone definitely wins. 10 out of 10 Yone and 8 out of 10 Yasuo. At this point, I'm anticipating some of you guys will go back and count the scores of each parameter, but I ask you not to do that. The number ratings were just to show you where they are in the grand scheme of things. If you were to look at the final tally, Yone would only be at 50 points while Yasuo would be at 62. So those weren't meant to be cumulative, since Yone scored 0 for 2 of them, which isn't fair. They do serve a purpose though. Yone is definitely on the stronger and more polarizing side in terms of pure combat, but Yasuo is more well-rounded. The reason he's been doing better in win rate for most of Season 11 despite Yone looking seemingly more broken is because he can handle a lot more matchups and work better with his teammates. Say whatever you want about solo queue being every man for themselves, I certainly have. Team fighting is still an essential experience in every game, so interactions with your teammates play a huge role in the champion's design. Now, people express more frustration with Yone than they do Yasuo, not necessarily due to relative power, but because of the contrasting ways that power is distributed. By himself, Yasuo isn't the most terrifying champion. It's his strength in conjunction with his team that makes him a force to be reckoned with. Yone can definitely team fight, but everything he does is for his own gain. In the grand scheme of things, Yone is much stronger than Yasuo on paper, but Yasuo has a better and honestly healthier design, which allows him to perform ironically more consistently despite having less consistent abilities. I'm sure many of us would rather take Yasuo's teamfight wombo combo and wind wall more than we would Yone because there's a chance he could miss everything and be useless. Whereas even if Yasuo is 0 and 10, he still presses W to block a whole bunch of skill shots, or he can get a 3-man NATO and perform for the team. What I'm trying to say is, Yasuo has a 10 death power spike, but Yone doesn't. And now to talk about their respective themes, I think Yasuo wins out on this too. He's all about wind, and each of his abilities reflect that. He throws tornadoes with his Q, his W is a wall of wind, his E lets him move very swiftly like he was riding wind, and his ultimate is a fast barrage of aerial attacks. The way they tried to implement Yone's spiritual thematic didn't really hit the nail on the head as much, for me anyway. Soul Unbound is pretty much the only thing that speaks to his background. If anything, I personally think they tried a little too hard to make him similar to Yasuo. Mind you, when they were younger, they both learned the same Kenjutsu, but apart from that, it would have been cooler to see Yone have abilities tied in more with exorcism since he's a demon slayer of sorts. A thought I had about him was if his ultimate would instead send himself and all that he hit into the spirit world kinda like a death realm. Basically, if Yone tagged the enemy Kaisa and Camille with Fate Sealed, the three of them would be trapped in an arena where all of them are immune to crowd control, and any damage he inflicts on them would partially damage their real bodies when they exit. And the way his targets can escape from the arena quickly is if they kill his spirit form first. Although his real form would take no damage, it would just bring them back to the corporeal world faster. You can think of it almost like Mordekaiser ultimate plus Illaoi E. Forget the balancing and all that, just concept. I'm getting off topic though. To wrap things up, Yasuo is better than Yone both in game design and honestly character design too. But when it comes to individual power, Yone can dish out way more punishment than his little brother. So it does come down to preference. For the most part, if we look at the totality of their respective strengths, we could say they're evenly matched. So in the future, I definitely plan to do comparisons between similar champions such as Garen and Darius, Sona and Seraphine, Rengar and Kha'Zix. Someone mentioned in the community post, Set vs Vi, which is worth looking into with both of them being very punchy champions. There's also Morgana vs Lux, Vayne vs Kai'Sa, Caitlyn vs Jhin, things like that. Anyway, this was my first episode, so there's definitely room for improvement, and I would love some feedback. Let me know your first impressions in the comments down below if you think I should have spent more time talking about another thing, or if you liked it as is, or if you think I spent too much time talking about something. For now though, if you enjoyed, a rating would be much appreciated. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this, Consider following me on my socials and joining my Discord server, and don't forget to check out my other discussion videos if you haven't yet. Till then, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon for the next one. Take care.